Well, it's always a delight to be with a group of parents who, number one, care passionately about their children. And I assume that's why you're here, because you care deeply and you have good dreams for your children. And second, I assume you're here because you think it's important to think. And that if you're going to be wise in bringing up your children, you're going to have to be reflective. So I hope that tonight I can fan the first of those a little bit and encourage you along the road, and second, give you some things to think about. You know, perhaps one of the most important questions a parent can ask him or herself is, what kind of a man, what kind of a woman do I want my child to be? There will come a day when your sons and daughters will be 30. And it'll be a whole lot faster than you expect. And at that point, they will have a very definite character. Your daughter will have a way of being in the world. With her spouse if she's married, with her friends, with God, with creation, with nature, with work. Your daughter will have a very specific way of being in the world. And that way will be either life-giving, rich, deeply satisfying, or less so. In like manner, your son, when he's 30, will have a very definite way of being in the world. With his wife, with his children, with his co-workers, with his friends, with God, with creation, with ideas, with work. He will have a very specific way of being in the world. And here's the thing. It's not going to happen just by being nice. Perhaps one of the greatest mistakes that parents make today is they think if they're simply nice to their children, it'll be enough. Let me tell you, parents that are just nice are not the most formative influence in their children's lives. Some of you have been reading The Collapse of Parenting, and for those of you who have not yet seen it, I would strongly recommend it. I believe if you want a copy of the book and haven't got it, Andrew will facilitate that process. Is that true? The Collapse of Parenting by Dr. Leonard Sachs, who's a physician and a PhD. And in his book, he'll tell you that the chief problems with parents today, number one, parents treat children like grown-ups. What would you like for dinner? Where do you want to go on vacation? What do you want to wear? In other words, parents are just too nice. Now, please hear me. I am not an advocate of being mean. Although if you're doing your job, let me assure you, the time will come when your child says you are mean. That's a mark of doing your job. I think one of the saddest stories I ever heard from a first grade Ambleside teacher, a particular young girl was she was not bringing healthy food to school. She was eating a lot of junk. She was, and it was clearly having an adverse effect. You could see her blood sugar levels spike and fall. And so the teacher met with the parent, and this was the conversation. Do you know your daughter needs a healthier snack and a healthier food, something that's lower glycemic, because she's getting these ups and downs, and the day's a roller coaster ride for her. I think we kind of leveled out the simple carbohydrates. It would help. This is what the mother said. But she doesn't like that. Well, I understand. But you are the mother, and you can pack her lunch. But she won't be happy with me. Do you know, there are times when, as a mother, you have to tell your daughter she must do something she does not want to do. And there are other times you must tell your daughter that she may not do something that she wants to do. To which the mother responded, but she wouldn't like that, and she might cry. To which the teacher responded, and this is the teacher herself was a mother of 3 by then adult children. And she said, she leaned over, looked into the mother's eyes, and said, you know, there are times you will make your children cry. To which the mother said, I don't think I can do that. What a travesty. What that means is the daughter's tears hold the mother hostage. The collapse of parenting. See, parents don't suggest, they command. Parents who put the child's wishes before that which is good and true and right do not breed affection, they breed contempt. Children actually have contempt for parents who don't take the role of parenting seriously. So the first thought, as we move into the topic tonight, parenting in the digital age, is who's in charge, who will make the tough calls, and are you prepared to make your children cry? For their good. Well, when it comes to parenting in the digital age, and there are 2 kinds of challenges, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about each of those challenges. The first is what I would call hard challenges, and that probably gets the most attention. You've probably heard some things on this. And the other soft challenges. Hard challenges speak to the destructive nature of certain abuses of technologies. Soft challenges speak to the way technologies fundamentally alter our way of being in the world. Get the difference between those two? There are a lot of technologies that are fundamentally, that are, in some sense, are neutral. I mean, for heaven's sakes, you got to know I'm not anti-technology. I travel with an iPhone, a Mac Air, and a Microsoft Surface. At home, I have a closet that's my prayer room, writing room. You know, it literally was a closet, and on it I've got, corkboard and things I'm praying for and Bible verses I'm studying, and, an old wooden cross that's particularly meaningful to me, and a picture of Mother Teresa, and I've got a 24-inch by 12-inch screen and a Mac Mini, which is where I hide away to do writing. Downstairs in my main office with a bay window overlooking our yard, I have a second computer, a Mac Pro with another 24 by 12 inch screen, and that's where I answer all my emails and do all my Ambleside Schools International management type work. So I'm not opposed to technology. But what I want to do is look at the hard abuses, the hard challenges, as well as the soft challenges in terms of how it shapes generally our way of doing life together. The hard challenges. Perhaps the greatest challenge is the fundamentally addictive nature of screens. Here's an excerpt from Digital Heroin by Dr. Nicholas Kardassis, and you can find that article on the Ambleside Schools International website in the library, but here's just an excerpt from it. At first, Susan was quite pleased with her son's interest in Minecraft. John seemed engaged in creative play as he explored the cube world of the game. She did notice that the game wasn't quite like the Legos that she remembered. But after all, she didn't have to then kill animals and find rare minerals to survive and get to the next level. But John did seem to really like playing, and the school even had a Minecraft club. So how bad could it be? Still, Susan couldn't deny she was seeing changes in John. He started getting more and more focused on his game and losing interest in baseball and reading while refusing to do his chores. Some mornings he would wake up and tell her that he could see the cube shapes in his dreams. Although that concerned her, she thought her son might just be exhibiting an active imagination. As his behavior continued to deteriorate, she tried to take the game away, but John threw temper tantrums. His outbursts were so severe that she gave in, still rationalizing to herself over and over again that, quote, it's educational. Then one night she realized that something was seriously wrong. I walked into his room to check on him. He was supposed to be sleeping, and I was just so frightened. She found him sitting up in his bed, staring wide-eyed, his bloodshot eyes looking into the distance as his glowing iPad lay next to him. He seemed to be in a trance. Beside herself with panic, Susan had to shake the boy repeatedly to snap him out of it. Distraught, she could not understand how her once healthy, happy little boy had been so addicted to the game that he wound up in a catatonic stupor. There's a reason that the most tech-conscious parents are tech designers and engineers. Steve Jobs was a notoriously low-tech parent. Silicon Valley tech executives and engineers enroll their kids in no-tech Waldorf schools. Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page went to no-tech Montessori schools, as did Amazon creator Jeff Bezos and Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales. Many parents intuitively understand that the ubiquitous glowing screens are having a negative effect on kids. We see the aggressive temper tantrums when the devices are taken away and the wandering attention spans when children are not perpetually stimulated by their hyper-arousing devices. Worse, we see children become bored, apathetic, uninteresting, and uninterested when they're not plugged in. But it's even worse than we think. We now know that those iPads, smartphones, and Xboxes are a form of digital drug. Recent brain imaging research is showing that they affect the brain's frontal cortex, which controls executive functioning, including impulse control, in exactly the same way cocaine does. Technology is so hyper-arousing that it raises dopamine levels, the feel-good neurotransmitter most involved in the addiction dynamic as well as in sex. This addictive element is why Dr. Peter Wybrow, director of neuroscience at UCLA, calls screens electronic cocaine, and Chinese researchers call them digital heroin. In fact, Dr. Andrew Doan, the head of addiction research in the Pentagon and the U.S. Navy, who has been researching video game addiction, calls video games and screen technologies digital pharmakeia, which is Greek for drug. Pretty grim, huh? It's not neutral. It's not just a screen, the way it interacts with the brain. In fact, just had this conversation just this week with an Ambleside principal. Not the one here, but another one. This one has 3 sons, and they're low screen, minimal screen, but they were visiting grandparents' house. And so even though they put a 2-hour limit on screen time for the 3 boys combined, and what he watched by the second day was a complete deterioration of their normal ways of relating to one another. They became irritable, anxious, and then when he took the screen away, they erupted in anger, which was atypical for these boys. Typical withdrawal symptoms. I have on my computer at home a study done at a hospital. I can't remember which one it was in the Northwest. It's either in Seattle or Portland, Children's Hospital. Here was the study. Something like 5,000 3-year-olds. One question: how many hours on a screen every day? Second question: when they're 6 years old, do they meet the diagnostic criteria of ADHD? For every hour of screen time on an average day, 10% increased probability of meeting the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. So if you're a 3-year-old on screens for 10 hours a day, and that is not atypical today. Just look around next time you're in an airport or at a restaurant. Not atypical for a 3-year-old to be on a screen 10 hours. You're doubling the probability that they'll meet the diagnostic criteria of ADHD when they're in first grade. Philip Zimbardo, in his book, The Demise of Guys, spends a lot of time talking about how the extent to which screens are dominating the lives of our young men, our junior high students particularly, and high school students, and the level of porn addiction. I saw a statistic once. Wish I had kept the study. But take this with a grain of salt, but I think it approaches the truth. If you're a 13-year-old boy and you have a screen in your room that's connected to Wi-Fi, 100% are on pornography. Because, think about it. A 13-year-old boy, let's put a stack of Playboys under his bed. Now, precisely what are the odds that 13-year-old boy is not going to be reaching down under his bed? Right? We're kidding ourselves if we don't think he's going to. And put an iPad connected to the Wi-Fi in his room. Just like putting a stack of Playboys under the bed, and worse. Girls don't tend to have that quite problem. Junior high, theirs is a little different. They tend to become obsessed with their image on the screen. Hours and hours photoshopping their pictures, scanning through hundreds of pictures to find just the right one and try to post it in just the right way. Now that is a recipe for fanning narcissism. a grossly unhealthy self-preoccupation and concern with how others are thinking of me. Currently, the average 9-year-old American spends 50 hours per week on screens. The average teenager, 70 hours a week on screens. On a 9-year-old spending 50 hours a week on screens, what's the most formative influence in that child's life? Is it parents? Is it teachers? I promise you, it's the screens. That's what's shaping the child's character. Every child is born knowing there are things worth having and things worth avoiding, but they're absolutely clueless what those are. Their affections are set first by the parents and then by the tribe. What do you desire, child? What do you want? Those desires were not random events. They were cultivated. And they were cultivated by somebody or something. And it's a function of quality time. Whoever has the most quality time with the child gets to do the most shaping of the affections. Screens have the advantage of the buzz factor, meaning they're designed to cause dopamine and adrenaline hits. That's tough competition. But parents have the heart factor because your children really want to bond with you, really want to be with you. That's a huge rub. As long as they know you want to be with them and that you feel comfortable with them. When it comes to setting the affections, and thus the kind of child our boys, a kind of adult, our boys and girls will be at the age of 30. Who or whatever gives them the most time, most quality time, wins. It'll be you, or it'll be their friends and their screens. And generally those become the same thing because the culture of the friends and the affections of the friends get set by the screens usually. So what's a parent to do? Be the parent. Don't be nice. Be good and be in charge. If not you, then it's Disney Corp who will be in charge. You want an interesting education? Go to the Disney Channel and say from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. one day, just watch. Just watch. And then ask yourself, is that the kind of relationships with adults, with peers, with self that you want your children to have? It's interesting. Second, limit and direct the use of technology. Absolutely no screens in bedrooms. Limit the time. Make sure there are technology-free times, fast in your home, so that we make sure we're not addicted. And watch out for the signs of addiction and withdrawal. Third, invest in positive alternatives. And the best positive alternative is you. You are the best alternative to screens. More about that in a moment. Let's talk about soft threats of technology. These are the ways technology interacts with certain cultural values and reinforces and supports them, and therefore shapes our way of being in the world. In the 7th grade history book, American history book, there's a chapter entitled, "The Sun is Overthrown." The S-U-N is overthrown. You might not have known this, but until 1883, pretty much every town had its own time. Sometimes in towns, there'd be many times because every jeweler might have their own time, and people would set their watches based on their loyalty to their particular jeweler. And so, if you were in Boston, the clocks were 5 minutes ahead of New York, and if you were in Baltimore, the clocks were 5 minutes behind New York because we used something called astronomical time. So noon was set when the sun was directly above you. So time was set by nature. Or in some people's minds, God, if you wish. Because God determined when it would be noon in your particular location. Now, this created a great problem for railroads. Wasn't a problem when we were using stagecoaches, which could at best travel 5 miles a day, 5 miles an hour on a good road. But once you were traveling 40 miles an hour, you had trains going in different directions, so that you'd have to change the track at a specific time. 5 minutes it was pretty important to get everybody on the same clock, right? So, time changed. Technology changed our time. And I think it was 1883 we established standard time. So it was no longer set by nature. It was now basically set by the railroad companies. Then everybody. Now, you think what a difference that made in our way of being in the world and how we relate to ourselves and others. Now, for the first time, we're on the clock. And that affects our ways of doing relationships. In the 18th century, if you set to meet someone at 1 o'clock, nobody was offended if you were 20 minutes late or 20 minutes early. Now we had a completely different subject because everybody's got watches and everybody's watches are set at the same time. So that when I'm at university and one of my younger sisters comes up to see the college campus, and she calls her big brother and says, this is actually rather embarrassing. She says, hey, I'm in town, let's get together. And I pull out my daytimer and I say, we can meet from 2:30 to 3:30 on Tuesday. She, of course, was rightfully indignant and offended. Well, that's actually the fallout of our change in the relationship with time based on certain technology. Because in the digital age, efficiency matters more than relationship. And that's driven by the technology and reinforced by the technology. Can you see how that might happen? In a different age, I would have said, she's come here? My afternoon's free. Let's just see what we do. But I was scheduled in my own mind every 30-minute slot. which is actually rather pathological. At least for those who believe in relationship. Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, points out that most people believe that technology is a staunch friend. There are two reasons for this. First, technology is a friend. It makes life easier, cleaner, and longer. Can anyone ask more of a friend? Second, because of its lengthy, intimate, and inevitable relationship with culture, technology does not invite a close examination of its consequences. It is the kind of friend that asks for trust and obedience, which most people are inclined to give because its gifts are truly bountiful. But of course, there is a dark side to this friend. Its gifts are not without a heavy cost. Stated in the most dramatic terms, the accusation can be made that the uncontrolled growth of humanity's technologies destroys the vital source of our humanity. It creates a culture without a moral foundation. It undermines certain mental processes and social relations that make human life worth living. Technology, in sum, is both a friend and an enemy. A new technology does not add or subtract something. It changes everything. In the year 1500, 50 years after the printing press was invented, we did not have old Europe plus the printing press. We had a different Europe. After television, the United States was not America plus the television. Television gave a new coloration to every political campaign, to every home, to every school, to every church, to every industry. We had a new America. New technologies alter the structure of our interests. That is, they determine what we think about. They alter the character of our symbols. That is, they determine what we think with. And they alter the nature of community, the arena in which thoughts develop. You know, few technologies are inherently evil. But the real challenge is the deployment of technologies as driven by certain cultural ideas, which those technologies mask and reinforce, causing us to adopt them uncritically, unthinkingly. Let me suggest two ideas that the digital age promotes and supports, which we would find rather questionable, but which are now cultural idols and ideals. Here's one idea. Fullness of life is found by doing what you want. Have it your way. And what you want is that which maximizes your pleasure and minimizes your pain. Next time you see a television commercial, any kind of commercial, maybe you're on, Amazon or something, and you see a commercial come across. Just watch this. Watch any video commercial. And notice what the implied promises are on the commercial. It's always, this is what you want, and we will give you what you want, and life will be so much easier, so much more pleasurable, and there'll be so much less discomfort. I mean, next time you see a commercial, watch if that's not what it's promising you. There is an intellectual history behind that. We think of the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 17th century and the British Bentham and Mill in the 18th century, but I don't have time to go into that. Here's the second idea. And actually, now these two in some ways are mutually exclusive and contradictory. But as you think about it, they dominate our culture and they define our use of technology. Resources are scarce and the environment is competitive. Fullness of life is found by working hard enough and smart enough to dominate your competitors. Well, that's pure Charles Darwin. That's pure Darwin. I mean, it's amazing the number of Christians I've met who would despise Darwinian evolution and kind of go to the mat for it, and yet are totally Darwinian in their approach to life. They approach life as if scarcity of resources, we're in competition, we got to be the smartest, the strongest, and work the hardest so we can beat everybody else. And by God, my children will be the winners in the competitive environment. Pure Darwinianism. But an idea that has saturated our culture. And, you know, there's not one of us in this room that's not profoundly impacted by those two ideas. And to some extent, we've all bought it because it's the air we've breathed in. And our children are going to buy it, and they're going to buy it in spades because the delivery mechanisms of those ideas are so much more potent now. Unless we're very clear in how we resist such ideas. Now, I'm not saying that all technological developments are motivated by those two. I mean, there actually is altruism. I think Johannes Salk, when he did the research that led to the polio vaccine, I mean, his goal was health. Eradicating a really destructive disease. I mean, Elon Musk is an interesting character. I mean, if you take seriously what he says, I mean, he developed Tesla not to conquer the auto market, but actually to reduce our dependency on carbon-based fuels. And he's given most of his huge numbers of his patents away. I mean, he's not playing the competition game. Not in the same way we normally think of it. Now, obviously, he's a brilliant entrepreneur. But what I am suggesting is, why does any particular technology sell today? Think of any technology that has a big market, including the Tesla, which is, I might add, a beautiful car. But why does it sell? And let me suggest to you that any technology that finds a mass market and really spreads does so precisely because it promises to increase our pleasure and decrease our discomfort, or it promises to give us a competitive edge in the battle. Not that every technology is developed for those purposes, but I would suggest to you that every technology that's propagated today massively gets propagated because it's undergirded by a commitment to one of those two values. Maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, competitive advantage over everybody else. That's what sells. Modern technologies propagate a value system. Winners win and losers lose. But is that a true statement? Is the purpose of life to make it to the 1%? Or would I rather have my child be a neurotic, performance-driven member of the 1%, or totally average in lifestyle, but knows how to love his spouse, care for his children, enjoys that which is good, true, and beautiful, has a rich relationship with ideas and books, has many friends, and is a blessing to everyone in the neighborhood? Oh, quote, winner, or one rich in the relational life? Two different value systems. Which do you want for your child? The world's going to say one thing to pursue. How strong will your voice be in countering it? Second, and again, this is a value that's propagated. Pain is to be avoided, pleasure maximized. Is that true? Is that true? Are there hard things worth doing? Is it always better to make the struggle easier? What happens when a school district endeavors to take all the struggle out of education? So we say, you don't have to learn your math facts anymore. You don't have to learn how to write. You can use a calculator, because then it'll be easy. And it doesn't really, what happens when we take away the struggle? We get very different kinds of people. And we get children who really cannot deal with adversity. And you remember the wonderful movie, The Princess Bride? And Wesley's great line, "Princess life is pain. Anyone who tells you something else is selling something." There's a lot of truth to that. Now, there's much more than pain. But pain has its function, and pain is not bad. Evil is evil. Pain is not evil. But if you don't know how to deal with pain, if you don't know how to struggle well, if any adversity overwhelms you, how will it be different for our children? How will they be able to suffer well and stay on task and do the hard thing? Well, it's all in your court. At Ambleside will help. But if you're not doing the hard stuff and making them do the hard stuff, that is the only way they will learn to do the hard thing. Once upon a time, life was such that you could not live without doing the hard thing. I mean, you had to get up, go outside in the snow and rain and cut the wood, or there was going to be no breakfast. Technology has taken so much of the discomfort out of life. And I'm not saying that's all bad. But we often don't think about the consequences. I mean, I saw a sociological study on the effect of air conditioning on life in the South, in the urban South. Totally changed everything. Because before air conditioning, and particularly before air conditioning and television, everybody was on their front porch. So everybody knew everybody on the street. So tell me, like I live in Virginia, it gets hot in July and August in Northern Virginia. But I think if we could make the trade and do away with air conditioning, but in return, everybody throughout June, July, and August was on their front porch so that everybody along the street knew each other, I'd make that trade. I'd make that trade. Last weekend, Mary Ellen and I were out working in the front yard. Across the street, for the first time, we saw our new neighbors. They moved in 9 months ago. We had never seen them. So, of course, we went over and introduced ourselves and said, they didn't know a single person on the street. And they were there for 9 months. That wouldn't happen if we didn't have air conditioning. Is air conditioning evil? No, but get the trade-offs and how it shapes our relational lives, and what are we going to do? And here's where I'm coming to. And this is my chief concern in terms of the soft impact of our technologies. And it's the way they marginalize relationships. Our technologies have transformed our relational lives in ways that have impoverished them. You know, relationships are hard. Facebook friends are not. That's why countless junior high students, high school students, have traded Facebook, Instagram friends for real friends, because real friends are work. So that's why, a couple of my younger sisters or younger siblings were teachers at the high school that I went to, large 2,000 student public high school. So I said, now, I'm the oldest of a dozen. My youngest sister's 26 years younger than I am. So I was having breakfast with my sister, my brother, and my sister-in-law, all three who were teachers at this high school. And I said, you're a teacher in there now. 10 years ago, you were students there. 35 years ago, I was a student there. How's it changed? What's the biggest change you've seen since you were a student there? All three said it's real easy. Technology has totally transformed relationships. One of them, my sister-in-law said, I'm a teacher. I've got students. They will not raise their hand and ask me a question. They will text me in class what their question is. My brother said, you remember the courtyards? We'd all, you had your group of friends, you'd be in one courtyard and other people. He said, everybody's still there. They're all sitting in the courtyards. But instead of talking to each other, everybody's texting people 20 feet or 50 yards or 150 yards away. Nobody's talking to anybody. Technology impacting marginalizing the relational life. And it affects us. What does our fetish for scheduling do to our relational lives? It's a totally different thing. If I go home, if I spend a Saturday, Sunday afternoon, and I say, family, we are together. Everybody take off your watches. We're just together for the day. The marginalization of relationships completely contrary to the gospel ethic of love. We're losing touch with each other. We're becoming thinner and thinner to one another. And particularly true of the next generation. Facebook friends replace real relationships. So, what's a parent to do? Well, what do you want? That's going to determine the answer. What do you want for your child? Do you want a rich relational life, or do you want an efficient, manicured life that maximizes the possibility of being a winner and minimizes pain? Although we kind of get that those two things don't quite go together, but we try. What do you do? Well, again, first, be the parent. Think, reflect, take charge. Reestablish the primacy of healthy relationships with wife, children, other persons, nature, ideas of God. The primacy of the relational life, not the technological life. So here's some ideas how to do that. Warning, these might sound radical. And I'm not saying become an Amish. How do you like this one? When home, turn off all cell phones at 6. Limit everything to the landline. Anybody who might need to call you. I mean, what, landlines, if you got internet, cost maybe $20 most a month. Turn off all the phones. I mean, powered down. At 6 o'clock every day. Tell your coworkers, tell your friends, tell anybody, tell your in-laws, tell your family. If it's an emergency, here's the phone number. Make your 13-year-old daughter's friends, if they want to talk to her, call the landline where you get to pick up. I mean, just think what that might do to the relational dynamics in your home. Just a thought. Turn off the phone at home and send everybody to the landline. Then you might actually have to be together and be relational. If it's an emergency, they can still get a hold of you. And if one of your sons or daughter's friends wants to talk to them, you get to pick up the phone. They have to talk to you first. That's really huge. Strictly limit screen time for everybody. You have no credibility if you limit it for your teenagers, but not for you. Not because all screens are evil, but because they are seductive and tend to overwhelm the more relational, life-giving satisfactions. It's just too easy to turn on a screen, particularly Friday evenings, when you're tired and it's the end of the week and you feel like and then you sit there for 3 hours and watch whatever. And let me tell you, at the end of that 3 hours, you're not more refreshed. And you don't have a better relationship with your wife and children. If you're that tired, go to bed. I mean, if you're too tired to sit and work a puzzle. Do you know Liberty Puzzles? They're just up the road. Totally cool. I mean, they're these beautiful, about half-inch wooden puzzles, laser cut, and they're done with great works of art. Mary Ellen and I have 7 of them. So it's like Raphael's School of Athens, or it's really beautiful, and it's actually a whole lot of fun to sit together and relaxing and do puzzles together. But notice how the difference in the relational life, if you're with your children doing a puzzle versus sitting together in front of a screen. chances are you'll go to bed saying, gee, that was a good time. Glad I did that. You know, when I turn on the TV on Friday night, I never go to bed saying, gee, I'm glad I spent the last 3 hours doing that. I never do. Limit child activities that tend to dominate family life. If your family runs itself around the, quote, child activities, sports is probably the number one. Let me tell you what you communicate to your children. Sports is more important than family. If your family runs around sports, there is no way that your children believe that somehow you and time with their siblings is more important than sports. Why? Because you're teaching them that what life revolves around is sports. Now, I like sports. I'm not against sports. But I'm saying if that's what dominates and controls your schedule, that's what your children will believe is most important. And they will believe that their teammates are more important than you are. They will not translate it, see how much Dad loves me. He lets me spend 5 days a week, 15 hours a week on the soccer field. See how much? No, they'll think, boy, this is what's really important. Dad and Mom believe this is what's really important about life. Not time with family. This is what's really important about life. Because why else would they have me investing this much of it? I would suggest that you reserve at least 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day to live by relationships, not a schedule. At least, I'm only saying 2 weekdays. Now that does say to some sporting events that want you to be there every day, you're just not going to do it. Because we got 2 days plus at least 1 weekday where nobody schedules anything because we're family. And family is more important than all this other stuff. Because relationships are more important than all this other stuff. Another suggestion, fire the lawn service. Establish Saturday morning as chore time. If not Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, but somewhere on the weekend, put in 2 hours where everybody in the family works together. We do the yard, we plant the garden, we take care, we do the chores, we mop the floors, but everybody in the family works together for 2 hours, side by side. Non-negotiable, it's what we do. Because that teaches work matters, work's important, sweat's good. Do you know sweat's good? Fire the lawn service. You need to work side by side with your sons and daughters. Regularly fast from digital technology. A day, a weekend, a week. See what happens. All technology, every screen turned off all day long on a Saturday. Better yet, for the weekend. Maybe if you're really bold, the whole week, and see what happens. If you get serious withdrawal, you'll likely get serious withdrawal symptoms the first couple of days. But by the end of the week, everybody's probably being nicer to each other and likes each other more. Now, here's the really radical one. Everyone stay home and turn off the electricity for the weekend. See what happens. Just all the electricity turned off at the main breaker on the house for the weekend. And everybody stays home in a home with no electricity. And see what happens relationally. Well, the mission of Ambleside Schools is to foster a healthy relational life, optimal relations with God, self, others, creations, ideas. And I hope some of these ideas help you along that way. God bless.